trigger this development. Okay? And this is general for any fruits. And then I thought it would be a good idea to just share with you some specific examples of physiological disorders, and this will be in apples, but many of these can be relative to can also be happening in other types. Okay? So this is what we are going to cover, and hopefully it is helpful for you. So we will start very general. What is fruit quality? It is composed by different factors such as the color of the fruits, that is going to change as the fruit ripens, the texture of the fruit, the taste, which is composed by the sugars as well as by the acids that are present in the fruit, the aroma volatiles, and aroma volatiles plus taste interact together to give us what we generally call flavor of the fruit. So it is a complex interaction between these three components. And last but not least, it's the nutritional value. It's also an important component of fruit quality. So very briefly, when we talk about changes in color that happen in fruit throughout ripening, generally we are going to be seeing a change or a degradation of these green pigments or green hue, specifically chlorophyll, paralleled by the accumulation of these non-photosynthetic pigments such as anthocyanins, which are responsible for giving us the red or the purple hues that we have in some fruits, or carotenoids that are going to be responsible for these yellow or orange hues that we see in other types of fruits. I'm talking about these parameters and fruit quality because fruit quality is directly affected when we have development of physiological disorders. Then we have texture. We all know that as fruits ripen, there is going to be a softening of the fruit, and this is going to make it crucial for the handling of the fruit as well as the potential post-harvest of these fruits. And generally, these changes in texture are going to be a result of modifications in cell wall, changes in the turgor pressure of the fruit, as well as can even be affected by composition of the skin or the cuticle of the fruit. Okay? Then we have another critical component for quality is taste, which, as I said, is mainly a result of the interaction between sugars that will give us the sweetness and acid, which is going to give us the acidity. Here, when we talk about taste, it's just important to remember that it's not only the quantity of sugars or acids that are present, it's also the composition, because different sugars or different acids can contribute differently to the sensory experience that we have as consumers. And of course, it's the balance. We can have very little sugar and a lot of acids versus having a lot of sugars and very little acids, and of course, our sensory experience is going to be different, what we perceive when we try it. So these three aspects are important to consider when we are thinking about the taste of the food. And then we have aroma volatiles, that is sometimes a component of quality that is not very much spoken about, but it is really important. Our olfactory nerve endings in the nose can detect more than 650 types of we have 650 types of different olfactory nerve endings, so we can detect a huge or wide amount of different volatile compounds. Fruit aroma in fruits is going to be influenced by the quantity as well as the composition. And here I just put some examples of different volatiles that can affect flavor of the fruits in general. We have volatiles that are related with the family of the esters, which are responsible for all that we perceive as the fruity aroma. Then the alcohols give us this green, this earthy aroma. The aldehydes are responsible to this grassy and bitter aroma for fruits that we can perceive sometimes. And specifically for peach, there is also a family of volatiles, the lactones, that are directly related with us perceiving this peach-like aroma in those fruits. So with that said, I just wanted to give an overview of what is fruit quality and its components. And again, I'm saying this because fruit quality is the one that is directly affected by the development of these disorders. And now we are going to go into what are physiological disorders and what are the factors that can trigger them. Okay? So just as a heads up and as an additional tool, if you're interested to read more about this, a lot of what I'm covering in this presentation is present in this fact sheet that we published some years ago. So I'm just putting it out there for your reference in case you want to go back and read that. So we are going to first define what are physiological disorders, and they are really defined as this type of abnormalities that can happen in different tissues of the fruit, again, not only apple, any fruits, that can lead to a loss of quality, marketability, and profitability, and thus will increase our losses. What is important about physiological disorders is that they are not caused by living organisms, and with that I mean pathogens or viruses, bacteria, etc., or mechanical damage, but it's mainly a result of non-living factors, such as the genetic background, environmental characteristics, the maturity at harvest, the management practices, etc., etc. And physiological disorders are capable of developing pre-harvest, while the fruit is on the tree, at harvest, or even, of course, during post-harvest storage. Now, we are going to go into some of the factors that trigger the development of these disorders, starting by the effect of the cultivar that we are growing and the rootstock that we are using, because both of them are important aspects to consider. So in terms of cultivars here, I'm just giving you examples related to apples, like in the case of apples, honeycrisp fruits are highly prone to the development of a disorder called bitter pit, that we are going to talk about in a minute. Besides, honeycrisp fruits are also very sensitive to cold storage, so they are very prone to the development of the physiological disorder of chin injury, so we have to store them at certain temperatures. If not, we know that the fruit is not going to store well. And then you have other cultivars such as Fuji or Evercrisp, which are late ripening cultivars, and generally these cultivars are very susceptible to a disorder called watercore. So here I'm just showing you this to give you examples of how cultivars can directly affect the propensity to developing these disorders. And then it's not only cultivars, but also rootstocks. Rootstocks generally are conferring special characteristics to the tree as well as to the scion or the cultivar. These characteristics are related with the architecture of the tree, the cold hardiness, sunlight distribution, all the lists that I have there, the time of ripening, the crop load, also the fruit quality and storability. And in apples, for example, there have been studies that show that if you use certain specific rootstocks, there is a higher probability of developing the physiological disorder of bitter pit, for example, in honeycrisp apples. So the cultivar we are growing, the rootstocks we are growing in are important factors and play roles in the development of physiological disorders. Then, of course, we have environmental conditions, the temperatures that we have during the growing season, and also in post-harvest storage. If we have too much precipitation, too high relative humidity, if we have excessive sunlight exposure, etc., all of these can lead to the development of physiological disorders, or on the other hand, to decrease the development, depending on the conditions. Okay. Then another important factor, of course, is related with the management of the field or during pre-harvest. And here there's many different factors like the manipulation of light, the position of the fruit in the canopy, sometimes that can play a role, the architecture of the canopy, the type of fertilization we're doing, the crop load of the tree, the irrigation practices, if we use or not plant growth regulators, and at what time, with what dosages, the density of the planting, as well as disease pressure. All of these factors that are related with management, of course, are also playing a role in the development of these physiological disorders. Then another important aspect is the time in which we harvest, or the maturity and harvest of the fruit. We generally, ideally, try to harvest the fruit at the correct or at the optimal maturity stage, because this is key for maintaining the quality of the fruit and reducing the susceptibility to these physiological disorders. Nevertheless, this is a big challenge because harvesting at this optimal maturity stage is sometimes very difficult. And I see it like it is in this cartoon, like a kind of balancing act. If we harvest the fruits too early, the fruits might going to have a poor flavor, they are going to be more prone to shriveling, the fruit might never ripen, and there might not be second chances from consumers. They will not come and buy your fruit again. And then on the other hand, if we harvest the fruit too late, it might be too soft, overripe, more prone to decay, and to shelf life problems. In terms of physiological disorders, in apples, some cultivars, if the fruits are harvested too early, they are going to be more prone to developing the physiological disorder that we call bitter pit. But if we harvest them too late, they are going to be more prone to developing the physiological disorder of chilling injury. So the maturity and harvest is also a very important factor to consider when we are talking about physiological disorders. And then, of course, the management in storage. The way we store our fruits is also going to have a huge impact on the development of these disorders. First, the temperature of storage in combination with the time in storage. Okay, so here I'm just giving you an example. In Honeycrisp fruits, we generally avoid storing fruits below 37 degrees Fahrenheit because we know that below the temperature the fruit is going to develop chilling injury because it is chilling sensitive. We need to avoid any breaks really in the cold temperature chain. Once these fruits are stored, we really need to maintain that cold storage conditions constant. Then relative humidity. We have to avoid being below the 90% of relative humidity, as this can increase water loss, and thus this can also be a factor that can increase susceptibility to disorders. The environment in terms of the gas composition, oxygen and carbon dioxide. We try to avoid high carbon dioxide levels and very low oxygen levels if we are establishing systems like controlled atmosphere to store our fruits. We need to have good ventilation or scrubbing of ethylene. Ethylene is this hormone that is related to many different processes in plants and fruits, but in fruits specifically it is related with accelerating the ripening of fruits. So we want to avoid that ethylene is capable of building up in our storage chambers because that can also have important effects on what is going on in terms of the development of physiological disorders. And then here I just put an example of one of the plant growth regulators that we can use in post-harvest, 1-MCP or 1-methylcyclopropane. This compound is going to block the perception of ethylene. So this ripening-related hormone, this compound can really block the downstream signals of the hormone, and that prevents its response to ethylene, and thus it can delay ripening. But there's also studies that have shown that if you apply this type of compounds, you can also have a higher susceptibility to develop some physiological disorders. So all of these, it's not that you cannot use it, but it's like with precautions. You just have to have these things in mind. Okay, everything impacts. And then we have as an example the preconditioning practices, which is generally storing the fruit before putting them to cold storage, storing them at a higher temperature for a certain period of time. This is done a lot in Honeycrisp fruits. It's also done in peaches. In the case of apples and for Honeycrisp, we generally hold the fruits around 50 degrees Fahrenheit for 7 days before submitting them to cold storage. And this helps the fruit prevent the development of disorders related to this chilling sensitivity. But it also has other negative effects. So all of these factors at the end, we have to know their consequences so we are able to make the best decisions in how to manage our food. Okay? That's really the objective of pointing out all of these factors. And with that said, now that you have a general background of physiological disorders and its main factors affecting them, I wanted to spend some time in just showing you specific examples of physiological disorders in apples. And in general, structured each one of these disorders is talking a little bit about what it is, what are the symptoms, what are the causes, when does it begin to develop, and listing some practices to avoid this development. So I'll start with bitter pit, which is the one that I've already mentioned. And here I hope you can see the picture. It really is characterized by these slightly water-soaked pits with these dark and dry sunken areas where the tissues are depressed. The flesh associated with this is generally brown, and generally we see it developing on the calyx end of the fruit, on the lower part of the fruit, as you can see in that picture. What is causing this disorder? Well, this is a disorder that has been affecting the apple industry for many, many years. There's a lot of research going on, and I think every time we're adding more and more information on it. But it is generally associated to imbalances in the levels of calcium in the fruit. Because calcium is a key component of the cell membrane, so if we have low calcium in the cells, we are going to cause the cells to become leaky, to break down, and this can lead to the death of the cells. So these pits that we see on the picture and that we really see when the fruit has bitter pit corresponds to these pockets of dead cells. Now it's important to know that calcium is generally taken up and distributed through the plant via the transpiration in the xylem, and specifically in honeycrisp fruits, it has been seen that the xylem tissue, for example, has a lower functionality. So that means that the distribution of calcium cannot keep the pace with the expansion of the fruit, and that many times results in the development of bitter pit. Now, it's not only calcium, it has also been seen that if we have excessive amounts of nitrogen, potassium, and magnesium, and low boron, we can also be increasing the susceptibility of the disorder of bitter pit. Boron is a nutrient that will help to move calcium through the plant. So if we have low levels of boron, then calcium levels can also be low. And it has also been shown that if we have excessive potassium and magnesium levels, that can also depress the calcium in the fruit. So that's why it's a balance of all these nutritional status of the fruit that is playing an important role here, combined with the cultural characteristics. Now, generally bitter pit will start to develop after the petals fall and can be expressed on the tree, as you can see in the picture, but it will be visually detected during the first 2 months of storage. In honeycrisp, for example, bitter pit will be exacerbated if the fruits are conditioned before exposing them to cold storage. So what I mentioned, that we can expose the fruits for 7 days at 50 degrees Fahrenheit before putting them to cold storage, this has been shown to help the fruits to reduce chilling sensitive disorders, but on the other hand, it has been shown to increase bitter pit susceptibility. Now, practices that can avoid development, I think it is an important aspect to consider the rootstock that you are choosing. As I mentioned before, there's some research showing that some rootstocks can make fruits being more susceptible to the disorder. Of course, focusing on the nutritional management and the crop load. We can do pre-harvest foliar calcium sprays, but these are more complementary practices. They are not going to solve the problem. You can also drench the fruits immediately after harvest in a calcium solution, but again, this is also a complementary practice, and ideally avoid conditioning the fruit if you have a high history of incidence of bitter pit in your orchard or your block, because by conditioning, you're just going to make it worse. And the time of harvest, you have to try to avoid early harvests, because if we harvest the fruit too early, we can enhance the development of bitter pit. Okay? So that was our first example. Then I want to move into a disorder related with carbon dioxide injury. And this, as you can see in the picture there, it is an expression of an external injury in the skin that forms these brown sunken lesions that can really join together and form these big patch that you can observe there in the left picture. And in the terms of the flesh, we can see these discolored areas within the vascular bundles forming these cavities or these pockets in the flesh that then can become dry. You will also be able to perceive a very strong fermentation aroma in the fruit when this disorder is happening. And this is mainly related with concentrations of carbon dioxide and very low oxygen levels when you are using the technology of controlled atmosphere, or because of some reason you have this high CO2 and low oxygen in your chambers. This is definitely used during post-harvest storage. It's not in the field clearly, and it can be induced very early within the first few months. And the symptoms will appear as the storage progresses until the apples are taken out of these high carbon dioxide conditions. What practices can we use to avoid development? Of course, try to maintain low levels of carbon dioxide during early control atmosphere. Try to delay the application of this control atmosphere storage if you are using it. It has been seen that the use of 1-MCP, this ethylene perception blocker, in storage can also enhance the presence of this disorder under these conditions. And the application of diphenylamine, which is an antioxidant, can also control this disorder somehow. Okay? But this just shows you the type of disorders that we can get if we are playing around or having concentration of gases in our post-harvest storage conditions that are not adequate. Then I want to share with you some examples of disorders that are really characterized by these different spots that we see in apples. We saw already bitter pit, and then there's several others that many of them look very similar, but they are different and they have different causes. So if you want to take action of them, you really have to be clear on identifying the correct one and then to be able to then take the correct measures. So this one is what we call lenticel blotch pit. It is expressed as these hard, asymmetrical brown patches that are around the lenticels of the apple. And again, they're also near the calyx end of the fruit or the blushed side of the skin. And they produce these dry, brown, sponge-like spots on the flesh of the apples too. In this case, they are caused when the fruit is harvested too late in the season. The incidence can also be higher when we have the fruit is exposed to really high temperatures in the summer and the fall, and to excessive nitrogen concentrations and very low calcium levels. It can also be at the level of post-harvest associated with the conditioning, as these management practices can hasten ripening and then can increase and deepen these depressions over time. This type of disorder, like lenticel blotch pit, can be visible right before harvest, but it generally will appear during storage when the fruit is already being packed. And practices to avoid it is really trying to avoid any practice that hastens the ripening, as well as harvesting the fruit too late in the season. Try to avoid these excessive nitrogen levels, and calcium sprays have been reported to decrease this incidence of lenticel blotch pit, but again, it's a more complementary practice. It's not that we just spray calcium, we are going to eliminate the disorder. It's a combination of practices we have to have in mind. Then we have lenticel blotch pit, and then we have lenticel breakdown. You see, so all of these are different spots that we can observe in apples, but they have different causes and ways to try to avoid them. So in this case, this corresponds to they are the result of this irregular water retention, and it can be found mainly on the apple skin around the lenticels, on both, on the blushed as well as on the shaded side of the fruit, all over the fruit, okay? They are characterized by these precise circular darkened spots that are concentrated in multiple areas on the skin. So this is not just found symptoms are similar to small dimples when you observe them in angled light, and during storage, as the flesh firmness decreases, these spots can grow in depth and diameter and may even combine. But in this case, the flesh at least is not generally affected, as we did see that it happened with the previous disorders I mentioned. What is causing this one? It is mainly caused by these micro cracks and any abrasions that can form on the skin layer of the apples during pre-harvest. These micro cracks and abrasions can occur due to irregular water supply, to very high humidity, and low wind. And the disorder is a result of these influxes of water and low rates of evapotranspiration that can cause fluctuations in the amount of water within the apples. It's really related to this balance of water within the apple fruit. Generally, this disorder will not appear before packing, but it will develop after a few days in storage. And in terms of what we can do to avoid its development, we can try to avoid irregular water supply to the apple fruits and any unbalanced nutrition in pre-harvest. Again, avoid harvesting apples too late in the season and avoid apples that are too big, as the risk of the disorder will increase. And because excessive storage periods in overripe fruit are also associated with higher disorder risk, we have to try to delay the cooling post-harvest as the fruit continues maturing. Okay, so this is also associated with fruit that is moving into the overripe phase. Then we have another example, which is the senescent scald. This, as you can see in the picture, corresponds to the formation of these brown patches that may become sunken and rough with very distinct margins. They generally will appear in the blush side of the fruit, exposed to the sunlight, and the interior of the fruit may have brown flesh. It's again associated with delayed harvesting, fruits being more overripe, storing fruits for more than 4 to 5 months when picked for short-term storage, and more than 12 months when you're really storing them for a long time. It can again begin pre-harvest as a result of this excessive sun exposure and combined with the late harvesting, and can also be observed during storage. What we have to try to do to avoid the development is avoid this late harvest, especially if the fruit is going to be stored. Sometimes we just delay the harvest because of scheduling conflicts or because we are waiting for color to develop, but you can have all these negative impacts on the fruit. And ideally try to minimize the excessive sunlight exposure by managing the tree canopy. Then we have what we call the soft scald, and this one is related to the disorder of chilling injury or chilling sensitivity that I mentioned before. As you can see in the picture, it really corresponds to these apples forming these brown, soft, sunken discoloration patches in the skin. The discoloration is very irregular, but it is very sharply demarcated and very clearly defined. And it can even, if it's really severe, it can even cover the whole apple skin. Here, the main problem is post-harvest is just storing the fruits at temperatures that are not adequate, that are too low. So it's really storing fruit at temperatures that are below 37 degrees Fahrenheit without previously exposing them to this conditioning treatment. It will develop and be visible generally after the first 2 months of storage of fruit below this 37 degrees Fahrenheit. And the practice that can help avoid this disorder is preconditioning the fruit, storing them at 50 degrees Fahrenheit for 7 days before storing them at 38 degrees Fahrenheit for several months. And then we have soggy breakdown that, together with soft scald, with the one that I just mentioned, is another symptom of chilling injury. In this case, it's not a damage at the level of the skin, but it's a damage at the level of the flesh. So as you can see in the picture, the flesh tissue turns brown, soft and spongy, and if it's very severe, you can get complete rings of brown flesh that can be formed. This is, again, as I mentioned for soft scald, this disorder can develop when the fruit is directly stored at temperatures below 37 degrees Fahrenheit and no conditioning is applied. Fruits that are harvested too late are also more susceptible, as well as large fruits. Okay. Here it has been reported that cooler temperatures and excess moisture near the harvest can also increase the disorder. And generally, it is highly correlated with the presence of soft scald. If we have soft scald, it's highly probable we will have soil breakdown. It will be visible after the first 2 months of storage, and preconditioning again is the practice that should be implemented in order to try to avoid the development of this type of disorders. If we know a block has a high history of developing chilling sensitivity related disorders, it is important to consider the preconditioning practice. Then we have another disorder called superficial scald. This one is related to a post-harvest type disorder that again is related to chilling sensitivity. This is only restricted to the skin of the fruits, usually the shaded side, the one that does not receive the sunlight, and is characterized by these diffuse or irregular brown patches on the skin that can be accompanied by this rough texture. And this disorder is going to develop very fast when the fruits are transferred from cold storage to room temperature. The causing agent of this disorder is the oxidation of a compound called alpha-farnesene, which causes this browning characteristic that we see on the skin. And the fruits are very susceptible when they are harvested very early, when they are physiologically less mature, when they have not received the 150 hours in temperature below 50 degrees Fahrenheit, when they are exposed to high temperatures during the months below harvest, when they are grown in warmer and we have a dry climate, and when we have too higher levels of potassium, nitrogen, and low calcium. It will develop during cold storage, but it can be enhanced 3 to 7 days after taking the fruit out of storage to room temperature. And practices that can avoid the development corresponds to the use of antioxidant products within the first week of harvest. An example is diphenylamine or DPA, which can prevent the accumulation of these alpha-farnesene oxidation products. We should try to remove any accumulation of ethylene in the storage chamber. In this case, application of this 1-MCP, this compound that can block the perception of ethylene after harvest, can help to avoid the development of this disorder. Have a good ventilation and trying to really keep low levels of oxygen storage present in the chambers. And then the last example I want to share with you is the disorder of watercore. This is really characterized, as you can see in the picture, by these water-soaked tissues that are present in the core of the apple. It generally will only affect flesh, and in severe cases, it may extend to the flesh cells under the skin and produce flesh browning and tissue fermentation during storage, but that's really very, very severe. What causes this disorder? It's really the accumulation of a sorbitol-rich liquid. Sorbitol is one of the principal carbohydrates or sugars that are present in the apples, and this sorbitol can start accumulating in the intercellular spaces of the apple tissue. The accumulation of this sorbitol can attract then water to the cells, and that is what gives this translucent or glossy aspect that you see in the picture. It generally will develop pre-harvest. As apples get closer to the maturity, you can start seeing the expression of the symptoms. And if the water core is slight or moderate, it can totally disappear during post-harvest. And practices that can avoid the development correspond harvesting apples at the optimal maturity stage, maintaining a uniform tree nutritional balance and avoiding this excessive vigor, and the use of plant growth regulators to regulate ripening can also reduce water core incidence, okay? But there might be some negative effects on skin color development. So there's plant growth regulators that are used pre-harvest that also can inhibit the biosynthesis of ethylene, such as retain. So retain has been very effective in reducing the development of water core, but it also delays ripening, and it has also been shown to have some negative effects on the development of red color. So with that, I just want to wrap up the presentation, and really the main messages I would like that you walk out with today are, first of all, that fruits are affected by many physiological disorders, and these disorders can develop pre-harvest on the tree, at the moment of harvest, or during storage. Physiological disorders can result from several abiotic factors which can affect the fruit and will lead to a loss of quality, marketability, and profitability that will increase losses. Understanding the susceptibility of cultivars and rootstocks to physiological disorders and to disorders' typical symptoms is critical to reducing the incidence. And it's essential to recognize the causes of these disorders and practices that can prevent their development in order to really know how to proceed and decrease their development. And with that, I want to thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take any questions if there are. Thank you so much.
Does anybody have any questions?
Well, I just wonder if nobody else has
Sure,
one.
sure.
Hi, Macarena. Can you see all of us? Can you see all of us?
I don't think so.
No, I cannot see you, but I hear you.
Okay, so I emailed you a while ago about bitter pit and strawberries. So I'm in Beltsville. And I wondered if you had any correlation between what we call in strawberries bronzing. Is there any apple corollary?
Okay, bronzing, what I know is more related with the peaches, that it has developed in peaches too. But in apples, so far, I have not heard of the bronzing type disorder.
Okay. So we've noticed that bronzing in strawberries occurs when there's a cloudy period followed by a bright sunny period. I wondered if there's any fruit corollary to that, and any other fruit that does something like that.
That's a good question. No, the bronzing that I have, that I am more familiar with is in peaches, in apples. Really the disorders of the skin are mainly the ones that I covered in the presentation. But bronzing in apples, that would be interesting to dive a little bit deeper and see, but not that I'm aware of.
I'm glad you think so. Maybe that's another thing we can work on.
Yeah, definitely. We definitely have to talk more.
All right. Anything else? Doesn't appear so. I want to thank you for coming on today and giving the talk.
Thank you so much, Chris, and enjoy the rest of the meeting. Bye.